There is a particular weight to a dream, a density that settles in the palms, in the quiet space between heartbeats. It is the weight of sleepless nights, of skipped meals, of silent prayers whispered over a canvas in a dimly lit kitchen. She carried that weight with her into the gallery that day, cradled in the form of a simple, worn portfolio. She moved through the spacious rooms unaware that her every step was being observed, that her every quiet breath was being measured by a destiny she could not yet see. In less than an hour, a man whose influence could shape continents would offer her a chance that would not just change her life, but rewrite the very definition of it. But first, she had to walk through a fire. She had to face a humiliation so profound, so meticulously designed to dismantle her spirit, that it would threaten to extinguish the very fire that fueled her. This is the story of that fire, and of the phoenix that rose from its ashes. Her name was Amara Collins, 26 years old. Her voice was often a soft cadence, a stark contrast to the roaring symphony of color and emotion that lived inside her. She was raised in a neighborhood where the fences were low, but the aspirations scraped the sky, a place where dreams were discussed in loud, vibrant tones on front porches, but where money spoke in the hushed, frustrating language of scarcity. Her studio was her kitchen table, cleared late at night after long days. Her easel was a board propped on a chair. Her light was a single, dim bulb that cast long shadows, under which she would stand for hours, rinsing her brushes in old yogurt containers because the professional ones in the art store felt like an impossible luxury. But what she lacked in tools, she more than possessed in vision. She had a kind of inner heat, a quiet, relentless combustion that didn't need to shout to be felt. It was a glow that sustained her through doubt, a fire that warmed her hands on the coldest of creative nights. For months, she had been saving. Every spare naira was a brick in the foundation of this day. Every bus fare she walked instead of riding was a step closer. Every simple meal she skipped was an investment in the feast she hoped her art would become. This portfolio was more than paper. It was a testament, a map of her soul. Today was to be her arrival, her first gallery submission, her chance to step out of the shadows and into the light. But the art world, for all its talk of beauty, can be an unforgiving landscape for a dream. It does not always welcome black dreams with open arms. Sometimes it greets them with a calculated, clinical gaze, with folded arms and a smile that does not reach the eyes. The air in the gallery was cool, scentless, but for a faint, expensive perfume of polished wood and isolation. The walls were a blinding white, a blank slate upon which judgments were already written. Each piece was encased in ornate gold, frames that seemed to say, "What is inside is valuable." The staff moved with a choreographed grace, their voices low and polished, each sentence a performance for an invisible, wealthy audience. Amara approached the vast, minimalist front desk. A woman looked up from a screen, her expression neutral until her eyes registered Amara. There was a pause, a microsecond of assessment. Then, her gaze traveled, a slow, deliberate journey from the coils of Amara's hair down to the simple, practical shoes she wore. The question, "Can I help you?" was delivered not as an offer of assistance, but as a subtle, territorial warning. Amara, her voice steady despite the sudden tightness in her chest, stated her purpose. She was here to submit her portfolio for the Emerging Artist Showcase. The woman's smile was a swift, practiced gesture, a muscle memory that never touched the cool appraisal in her eyes. She directed Amara to a room in the back, adding with a tone that was both polite and pointed, "Just so you're aware, the standards for the showcase are extremely high." It was not a warning, it was a preemptive dismissal. The walk to the submission room felt like a mile. Her footsteps echoed on the polished concrete floor, and as she walked, she saw them, other artists leaving a different office, their laughter bouncing off the high ceilings. They dragged large canvases, their portfolios tucked casually under their arms. They were met with easy smiles, with familiar handshakes, with a hug from the curator himself. They didn't have to sign a form, or wait, or prove their right to be there. They belonged. Amara pushed open the heavy oak door to the submission room. It was smaller, quieter. Behind a large, empty desk sat the curator, a man in his late 50s, with carefully styled silver hair and thin wire-frame glasses that perched on the bridge of his nose. He was the kind of man who had spent so long in a position of taste-making that he had come to believe his opinion was not subjective, but fact. He didn't look up when she entered, his attention fixed on a document. "Name," he asked, the word clipped. "Amara Collins." "Background," he continued, still not looking up. I'm self-taught. I work primarily with acrylics and mixed media. He finally looked up, and he stopped, his eyes a pale, watery blue, focused on her. He stared, his head tilting slightly, as if she were a puzzle piece from a different box altogether. "Oh," he said, a single syllable, sharp, cold, and heavy enough to cut the string of a dream. She held out her portfolio, her hands trembling. It was not a tremor of fear, but the physical manifestation of hope, a raw, exposed nerve. He didn't take it, he just continued to look at her, his expression one of faint bemusement. "Artists like you," he began, his voice taking on a condescending, almost paternal tone, "don't usually fit our gallery's established aesthetic." Amara blinked, the words not quite computing. "Artists like me?" He gave a slow, weary sigh, as if explaining something very simple to a child. "As I've said, we curate for a very specific type of collector. Our clients are investors, philanthropists, people with a refined, traditional palate. They appreciate real art." The implication hung in the air, toxic and clear. In his world, her blackness, her story, her very existence, was the antithesis of what was real, what was refined. And in that moment, the curator was entirely unaware that his performance of power was being witnessed. He did not see the door behind him, left slightly ajar, or the figure of a man standing silently in its frame, having paused to listen. A man whose presence would soon recalibrate the entire balance of the room. Amara felt the heat of shame begin to creep up her neck, but beneath it, a colder, harder resolve was forming. She inhaled slowly, the air tasting of rejection. "Sir," she said, her voice quieter now, but firm. Could you at least look at my work? Please." He exhaled, a sound of profound inconvenience, as if she had asked him to move a mountain. Reluctantly, he took the portfolio. He did not open it with curiosity, but with duty. He flipped through the pages, not a study, not an engagement, but a perfunctory gesture. Flip, flip. His eyes didn't linger on a single stroke, didn't pause to absorb a single color. He gave 20 seconds of his time to a lifetime of her feeling. He closed the cover with a definitive snap. "This is certainly emotional," he stated, the word emotional sounding like a diagnosis. "Perhaps too emotional, too raw, it lacks commercial sensibility." Amara's throat constricted. He was looking at her soul and calling it unmarketable. "But," she started, a last desperate attempt, "we could consider it if—" He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was far crueler than a shout. "If you were willing to adjust your thematic focus, less emphasis on the racial history. Our buyers, you see, they want pleasant art, something that elevates a space, not heaviness." He allowed a small, condescending smirk to play on his lips. "People don't want to feel guilty in their living rooms, dear." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Was her identity, the history written in her blood and bone, something to be sanded down, repainted into a soft, pleasant, inoffensive backdrop? Was her truth merely heaviness to be discarded for the comfort of a white wall? And then he delivered the line that would etch itself into her memory, a scar and a badge of honor all at once. "Honestly," he said, his voice returning to its normal, dismissive volume, "we don't showcase artists like you." The finality of the statement seemed to suck all the sound from the room. And it was in that hollow silence that another sound became audible. Footsteps, slow, intentional, measured like a steady heartbeat. They came from the doorway. The curator's head snapped toward the sound, and his practiced, professional smile instantly returned, only to freeze, then slowly dissolve from his face. The man who had entered was Alexander Hale. His name was known in circles of immense wealth and global philanthropy, a billionaire who had funded museums and arts programs on every continent. His presence did not simply fill a room, it redefined it. He stood with a quiet authority that made postures straighten and voices hush. His eyes, a deep, observant brown, scanned the scene, taking in the curator's frozen expression, the portfolio on the desk, and Amara, standing her ground in the center of the storm. He looked at the portfolio, then his gaze shifted to Amara, and in his eyes she saw something she had not encountered all day. Not pity, not judgment, but a deep, focused recognition. Hale's voice, when he finally spoke, was soft, but it carried through the room with the clarity of a bell. "I see you're reviewing submissions for the showcase." The curator stammered, a pathetic, sputtering sound. "Mr. Hale, I didn't expect you. Yes, of course. This one is still under consideration." Hale's gaze was unwavering. "A moment ago," he stated, his tone factual, not accusatory, "you dismissed it, quite definitively." The curator's face lost its color. "No, that's not. I was merely providing constructive feedback." Hale held up a hand, a gentle but absolute gesture that silenced the man. He then gestured to the portfolio. "I watched you flip through this entire body of work in less than 20 seconds. You saw paper. You did not see the brushstrokes, the layered texture, the silent story waiting in every frame." He then turned his full attention to Amara. His demeanor shifted, becoming almost reverent. "May I?" he asked her. She could only nod, her voice lost somewhere deep inside her. He opened the folio, and he did not flip. He studied. He leaned in, his eyes tracing the lines of the first painting, a vibrant, powerful piece titled Daughters of the Soil. His voice was low, almost a murmur, but every word was clear. "This piece, it feels less like a painting and more like a prayer, a visual hymn. You've captured movement here, attention caught perfectly between the weight of survival and the grace of transcendence." Amara's eyes widened. No one had ever spoken about her work that way. No one had ever seen the prayer in it. He turned to the next page. Unburied Names, a piece that used soil, charcoal, and acrylic to depict faces emerging from a dark, textured background. "And this," Hale continued, his finger hovering just above the page, not touching it. "Do you know how powerful it is to paint a history that refuses to stay silent? To give names to the forgotten?" Amara swallowed, a single tear finally escaping, tracing a clean path through the dust of the day. It was a tear not of sadness, but of being seen, truly seen, for the first time. He closed the portfolio gently, holding it in both hands as if it were a sacred text. Then he spoke the sentence that split the moment wide open, that divided Amara's life into a before and an after. "This is the kind of art the world is starving for, precisely because it is the kind of artist the world has been trained to overlook." And what he said next would silence the room for a second time, cementing the turn of fate. Hale took a single step forward, his focus now entirely on the curator. His voice remained quiet, but it was now edged with a steel that was unmistakable. "Cancel the Emerging Artist Showcase," he said. The curator blinked, his mind refusing to process the command. "Cancel the entire showcase, sir?" "Yes, we're doing something different." He turned back to Amara. "I want your work, all of it, featured in a solo exhibition, in this gallery's main hall." The curator made a sound, a half choke, half gasp. "A solo exhibition? For her?" Hale raised an eyebrow, a simple gesture that conveyed a universe of meaning. For her. "But sir, with all due respect, this gallery operates under a specific set of standards, a legacy of—" "And you," Hale interrupted, his voice dropping even lower, "violated the very heart of those standards today. You judged an artist not by her art, but by the color of her skin. You dismissed a story because it was written in a language you found unfamiliar and therefore threatening." The curator looked from Hale to Amara, and for the first time, his gaze held not disgust, but something new, something raw, fear. Hale continued, his words not just for the curator, but for the room, for the very walls themselves. "My grandmother," he said, a distant warmth entering his eyes for a moment, "was a woman who knew a thing or two about blindness. She used to tell me, racism is a blindfold people willingly wear because they are afraid to see their own insignificance in the grand, beautiful tapestry of humanity." He turned his back on the curator, his focus returning to Amara. "I would like my foundation to fully sponsor your first solo exhibition. The venue, the framing, the marketing, the press, everything. It will be yours." Amara stared, her mind a whirlwind of disbelief and dawning joy. The tears were flowing freely now, but she made no move to wipe them away. I don't know what to say." Hale offered her a small, genuine smile. "You don't have to say anything. The art has already spoken. It has been speaking all along." He began to walk toward the exit, then paused, turning his head slightly, his final words not even directed at the curator, but to a board director who had appeared in the hallway, having heard the commotion. "Oh, and see to it that he's fired," Hale said, with the same calm tone one might use to order coffee. This gallery, and the art it claims to serve, deserves far better leadership. The curator's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. He was a statue of his own making. And Amara, standing in the center of the room, felt her heart beating a fierce, triumphant rhythm against her ribs. It was not the beat of shock anymore. It was the steady, powerful drum of a newfound belief. But the closing of one door was merely the prelude. Her rise, her true journey, was only just beginning. The day after the encounter felt like stepping into a different world. The Hale Arts Foundation was not a place of cold, imposing grandeur, but a hive of warm, purposeful energy. Instead of judgmental stares, Amara was met with handshakes and smiles from people who looked at her work not as a problem to be solved, but as a gift to be shared. They handled her paintings with white gloves, discussing light fastness and archival framing with a reverence that made her want to weep. They arranged for professional photography, for color-graded catalogs, for PR interviews, where the questions were about her process, her inspiration, her story, not about her background. Within 2 weeks, her face was in the arts section of major publications. Her name was on the lips of collectors and critics. Social media buzzed with images of her work. But on the opening night of her solo exhibition, as hundreds of people, celebrities, socialites, fellow artists, activists, flowed through the gallery, Amara found her truth not in the famous faces, but in the quiet ones. She watched a young black girl, no older than 14, stand before Daughters of the Soil for 10 full minutes before turning to her mother and whispering, "I didn't know we were allowed to paint like this." She saw an older black man, his shoulders stooped with the weight of years, wipe a silent tear as he looked at unburied names, later telling her, "You captured a kind of pain we were all told to forget. Thank you for remembering." These were the moments that defined her success. This was the impact. Later that evening, Alexander Hale found her standing in a quiet corner, watching the crowd. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with a quiet pride. Amara looked at him, her eyes shining. "No," she whispered back, her voice thick with emotion. "You believed in me before I even knew how to believe in myself." He shook his head gently. "I only recognize the fire, Amara. You are the one who had to carry it all this way. You are the one who kept it burning." Together, they looked out at the room. The walls, once a sterile white, now glowed with the vibrant, soulful colors of her art. The pieces that had once lived only in her small, dim kitchen now lived in the world, speaking their truth to anyone willing to listen. And it was with the embers of that very fire that Amara began to build her true, enduring legacy. The financial success from her exhibition was significant, but it did not translate into a life of luxury cars or designer clothes. For Amara, the money had a different purpose. She rented a small, sun-filled studio in a part of the city that other more established artists had overlooked. And on its door, she painted a simple sign, "The Soil Studio, a free workshop for emerging artists of color." She filled it with secondhand easels, donated supplies, and a large, communal table. She gave them paint and charcoal and canvas. But more importantly, she gave them permission to feel everything they felt, permission to remember the stories they carried in their bones, permission to be raw, to be loud, to be messy, to take up space without apology. One afternoon, a few months after the studio opened, a young girl hovered at the doorway. She couldn't have been more than 16, her posture a portrait of hesitation. Her name was Saad. She was quiet, her eyes holding a familiar mixture of fear and a desperate, flickering hope. Amara smiled, a gentle, welcoming gesture. "What's in the bag?" she asked softly. The girl clutched a wrinkled plastic grocery bag to her chest. My art," Sade whispered, her voice so low it was almost inaudible. I didn't think anyone would ever want to see it." Amara's heart clenched with a painful, beautiful sense of recognition. She held out her hand. "May I?" Sade, after a long moment of internal debate, slowly handed over the bag. Amara opened it carefully, pulling out a sheaf of drawings on frayed notebook paper. The first one was a self-portrait, rendered in pencil, the lines both hesitant and fiercely confident. It was raw. It was painful. It was breathtakingly beautiful. Amara looked from the drawing to the girl's face, and she saw her, truly saw her, the way Alexander Hale had once seen her in that gallery. Her eyes filled with tears. Sade, she said, her voice firm with conviction. People need to see this. The world needs to see this. The girl's eyes, wide and disbelieving, brimmed with tears. Really? She breathed. Amara nodded, a single, definitive motion. Really. And in that profound, circular moment, Amara understood the strange, difficult, and beautiful mathematics of destiny. Sometimes the door that is slammed in your face with such finality is not your failure. It is a redirection. It is the universe steering you away from a path that was never yours to walk, because it was too busy building another one, wider and more glorious, with your name already carved into its foundation. In the years that followed, as her fame grew and her work found homes in international collections, interviewers would always ask the same question: what was the moment that changed your life? Amara never spoke of the billionaire, not as a savior. She never mentioned the money, the headlines, or the acclaim. She always said the same thing. A man I had never met believed in my art at the precise moment another man was trying to convince me that my existence was too large, too dark, too much for the room. She would say, "The world tried to tell me I didn't belong, but the universe, in a whisper I almost missed, told me to stand still. It said, 'I am about to make room for your name.'" And she would explain, her voice steady and sure, that every painting she now creates carries not just her own fingerprints, but the invisible fingerprints of every person who was ever told they were too black, too loud, too raw, too emotional, too real. Because art, at its absolute core, is not decoration for a wall. It is an act of defiance against silence. It is the keeper of memory. It is the physical form of freedom. So the next time someone tries to shrink your dreams, to tell you that you don't fit their aesthetic, remember the weight of Amara's portfolio and the fire it contained. Their limitations are a story they have written for themselves. They are not your destiny. The blindfold they wear to avoid seeing their own reflection is not your burden to carry. And their no, delivered with such certainty, might just be the necessary doorway to a yes, far bigger, far brighter, and far more beautiful than you could have ever imagined. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever carried a dream quietly because the world felt too loud, we invite you to share a piece of your story in the comments below. You never know who might be listening, who might find the courage in your words to unlock their own fire. And if this story, this echo of a dream realized, found a home within you, then please stay with us. There are more truths waiting to be told, more quiet voices waiting to be amplified, more echoes from the heart that deserve to be heard. This is our Black Diary, where every story, especially yours, finds its home.